Welcome, everybody. Sorry about that reverb, but welcome. It's great to have you here. My name is Joe Cole. I'm Associate Professor of Restorative Justice at the Center for Justice and Peace Building here at Eastern Mennonite University. And I'm so glad that you are joining us for this SARE Institute webinar in conversation with Felix Rosado, as he shares his journey from incarceration to restorative justice professor and author of Justice from the Inside Up. I also want to give thanks to Corey Schaefer, our Director of Programs here at the Center for Justice and Peace Building, for his work in shepherding our live streaming experience today. So in a few moments, we'll get into our conversation between Felix and Howard Zare, and then we'll have a Q&A session starting around 1 o'clock Eastern time, and then a few brief announcements before we close. Let me introduce our speakers today. Felix Rosado is co-founder of Let's Circle Up, a restorative justice education project, and he is also author of Justice from the Inside Up, a Restorative Justice Education Facilitator's Manual. In 2022, Felix narrowly escaped death by incarceration via Governor clemency after 27 years. While inside, he also co-founded the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, earned a bachelor's degree in Interdisciplinary Studies from Villanova University, and served in leadership with the Alternatives to Violence Project and Inside Out Prison Exchange Program. Today, Felix serves as program manager of Healing Futures, a youth RJ diversion program with the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project, teaches RJ at Chestnut Hill College and Community College of Philadelphia, resides in Southwest Philadelphia, and is the proud father of Jubilee, born a week shy of his 2-year anniversary. Howard Zehr is widely recognized as one of the founders and early pioneers of the restorative justice field. In his role as director of a National Criminal Justice Resource Office, then as professor of restorative justice at the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding, he has assisted and mentored many individuals and organizations. He has lectured and consulted in numerous countries. His publications include Changing Lenses, the book that helped to define the field initially, and the best-selling Little Book of Restorative Justice. Many of these books have been translated and published in other languages. His latest book is Restorative Justice: Insights and Stories from My Journey. He has also been a professional photographer and has published a number of books based on photography, including the recent Still Doing Life, 22 Lifers 25 Years Later. Viewers, remember to submit your questions as we listen to Felix and Howard. Feel free to type them in the chat as they arise, and we'll come back to them later in the Q&A. And now it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Felix and Howard. Welcome to you both, and I'm excited about hearing your conversation.
Thank you. Hey, Felix.
An honor.
Well, it's good to see you. You know, every time I see you outside those dehumanizing walls, it's so, and then you always have, now you have a smile on your face. You didn't always have a smile.
Can't take it off, Howard.
Yeah, it's good. That's good. Hey, can you remember how long, when we met? I can't really quite remember that.
I believe we met in 2008.
Okay.
I was introduced to restorative justice, or rather restorative justice found me through one of your books in 2007 that I had to read for a class I was in that was being offered by Temple University and taught by a mutual dear friend of ours, Kay Harris.
Kay Harris, yeah.
Yeah, rest in peace and power.
Yeah.
To her. And so that piqued my interest, and that interest quickly became a passion. And as fate would have it, I met another dear and mutual friend of ours, Charles Boyd, a few months later. He's currently in year 42 of his death by incarceration sentence, and we're trying hard to bring him home. But as soon as I met him, I learned that he was also passionate about restorative justice, and that he was putting together an intro to restorative justice workshop. So I joined him in that effort, and it eventually grew into what we now know as Let's Circle Up. But at some point, you were coming in to bring a group of your graduate RJ students to the prison to share an experience with us. And Charles invited me. He had already had a relationship with you because of prior work that you were doing in the prison. And so he asked me if I wanted to come to this. I said, absolutely. So anyway, we were sitting in the room in the lower deputies complex, which you spent a lot of time in whenever you would come. And we were sitting every other seat to allow you all to come in and sit next to us. And you ended up sitting right next to me. And I couldn't believe it. And we had this icebreaker activity where we were paired up with the person next to us, and we were just talking about some random topics. and it was you and I.
That's right. Now I remember. Yeah.
From there, the brotherhood grew.
Well, those were great times. We used to bring a combination of graduate and undergraduate in there, and at the end of their 4 years, the undergraduates here were asked what the most transformative experiences were in their education. A lot of times they would say participating in those classes. Yeah, they were just
It was equally
powerful.
transformative for us.
Yeah. Those were the days at Graterford. It's not quite the same now, but we don't have to get into that.
Yeah.
Well, tell me, so you were in there, you were 27 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit what that's like. I mean, our viewers don't necessarily know what prison's like, but even specifically a sentence like that. Talk about that a little bit, would you?
Yeah. So I went in at 18, and I was sentenced to what I and many now call death by incarceration. I prefer to call this sentence by its true name and refuse to call it life or life without parole or any term with the word life in it. It is truly a death sentence. It's America's other death penalty, which unfortunately doesn't get as much attention as lethal injection does. And it's killing a lot more people, and more people are suffering from it. So I got sent to Graterford State Prison, which is or was the fifth largest prison in the country, the largest in Pennsylvania, and was notorious for corruption and violence and drugs. And I got thrown in there. And I still remember my first day, actually. I was walking through Graterford's notorious main corridor, and everyone was out. At least 1,000 people were walking around in that corridor. And I was with about 5 other guys who came on the bus with me, and we had our yellow jumpsuits on, and we were each carrying a cardboard box with our belongings. And I remember being so afraid. I didn't know what the next minute or second was going to bring. And we finally got to the cell block we were going to be on, which was the last one. And we went in, and a CO, a correctional officer, dumped a trash bag of wrinkled brown uniforms onto the table, said, "Find something that fits you," and walked away. And that was my orientation to state prison. I finally found something that looked like it fit me, made my way to the control center and asked the officers there where I was going to be staying. And eventually they told me what cell. I found my way to it, and I met my new cellmate. He had 5 years in on his death by incarceration sentence. And we were standing outside of the cell, and the block was wide open. 550 people were on each cell block. They were a quarter mile long, and people were just walking around. And at the time, we were permitted to wear regular clothes, as we called it on the inside, street clothes.
Street clothes, yeah.
Well, the prison clothes. And you remember those days.
That
changed in 1997 when 2 people escaped from Western State Pen and got caught down in Texas, and they blamed the fact that they were wearing regular clothes on, them.
I never knew what caused that change.
So anyway, people were just wearing regular clothes. And I remember these 2 guys in particular walking laps around the block, looking like they had just come out of the 70s. And it was 1996. And so they had these bell bottoms on, these humongous afros, these butterfly collars. And I remember asking my new cellmate what the deal was with these men, I asked what their whole thing was. And he looked at me as matter of fact as ever and said, he's such and such, he's been here 30 years, and the other guy is such and such, and he's been here 35. And my heart dropped. My 18-year-old brain couldn't fathom a human being caged twice as long as I had been alive. even when the judge banged his gavel and said, "I sentenced you to life without parole," I still didn't fully comprehend what that meant, because like most people walking around in society, I thought it meant 20 years, 15 if you behave, which was still a lot of time.
Yeah.
But 30 and 35 was something different altogether. So my next question to him was, how many life sentences do they have? 3, you know? And he looked at me again and he said, "Little brother, they have what you have." And that's when it hit me. The next day I was in the law library trying to get my conviction overturned, and that didn't go anywhere. I didn't know what I was doing. The law library was a mess. People were basically just going there to hang out, to exchange drugs and money, and the shelves were missing half the books, and the books that were there were missing the most crucial pages. So it was really discouraging. And I ended up paying guys cartons of cigarettes to file briefs on my behalf, and they were messing up my case. And before long, hopelessness started to set in, and I started smoking weed. And before long, I was up to my street marijuana habit, and I found myself in a lot of trouble because of it, and just ended up going to what's known as the hole, the restricted housing unit, usually for 90 days at a time. And I'd come out, I'd go back, I'd come out, I'd go back. And I was stuck in that cycle for a good 8 years.
Wow. I didn't know that part of your story. You know, a lot of folks in there serving those sentences have told me their lawyers didn't know that a life sentence was a life sentence. They told them, "Oh, you'll be up for parole in 7 years."
Mine told me something similar.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You know, another thing about that death by incarceration, years ago, I chaired the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. And one of the things that really bothered me is that people were suggesting that that was an alternative to this sentence, and it's easier to vote for. And but we need a little education on that one.
A lot of education.
A lot of it. Well, how did you cope? I mean, it must be traumatic. I mean, what you suggested sounds like trauma to me. Is that pretty common for people going through this experience? They experience trauma?
Absolutely. You know, I don't think anyone who has spent a day in prison, you know, hasn't experienced or lives with some kind of trauma. You know, I've seen the mental health of many men deteriorate over the years. You know, I witnessed it with my own eyes, and you know, but for the grace of God, I still have some of my sanity left. Yeah. Just grateful for that. But part of that was because of me finding meaning in there.
Well, I was going to ask, how did you break that cycle? You know, how did you find meaning? Because I've heard that from a lot of folks in there that need to find meaning.
Yeah. Well, I was in the hole doing 90 days in 2004 for my second dirty urine. And back then, when you get 3, they would transfer you. And so I was an hour away from home. Really didn't want to go any further and put my mother through more stress and suffering. So I was sitting down there, and at this point I'm 27. So the neuroscientists now tell us that that's when the brain is fully developed, and something was different about that time. I remember laying in my bunk one afternoon while everyone on the wing was asleep, and I started asking myself some really tough questions for the first time in my life. I started wondering about my legacy and what is this all going to mean? Is anyone going to remember me when I'm gone? And at some point I asked myself, how did I get here? How did I get from being a straight A student in elementary school, deemed gifted, to sitting in the furthest place from freedom a human being could be. And I ended up tracing my steps back, and I ended up identifying some key moments when my life took a serious downward turn. And so I decided that I had to make another turn, just as drastic, and this time in the opposite direction. And so I started to reconnect with my faith. I started to actually read the Bible verses that my mother would send me in every single letter that she had ever written. And I started to feel different. And when I came out, I had a new focus. I stopped getting high. That was the first decision I made. And then I started getting back into my law work, this time doing it on my own. I started sitting in front of a computer at the law library, reading case law for hours a day, 3 times a day, till my eyes felt like they were going to bleed. And I didn't understand any of it at first. It was like reading Chinese, but I sat there and I read and I read and I read. And ultimately, it started to make a little sense to me. And almost everything I was reading was telling me, though, that I didn't have a chance. But every once in a while, I would stumble across a line or a paragraph that gave me some hope. And I started to jot that down in a notepad. And eventually the notepad was filled. And then I reached out to an attorney, and we started talking. And eventually she took my case. And long story short, I found my way back into court. So that felt good. Hope started to replace despair. So I spent the next 2 years after coming out of the hole that last time doing law work, exercising, and playing sports. I let go all of my previous habits, and I spent all my time doing this and also reconnecting with my family from the outside. I had started to lose touch with them because my world became engulfed with prison. And so after about 2 years of that, I still felt like something was missing, and I couldn't quite put a finger on it. So I had reached out to the Catholic chaplain at the time, and we had a conversation. And from there, I ended up rediscovering the Catholic faith of my upbringing, which I had left when I was like 12. And I started going back to mass and went every week, and haven't missed one yet. That was in 2006, even out here. And that same chaplain ended up offering me a job at the chapel. And at first I had said I wasn't sure, because I was only a couple years removed from my old self, and I just didn't feel I would be right there or that I belonged. But a week or so later, I was sitting in the cell, and I got this powerful urge to give it a shot. And so I went back to the chaplain. I said, "Hey, is this still available?" And he started the process, and eventually I got a job there. And so all my coworkers, many of them, James Muhammad Taylor and a bunch of other guys, were like over 60, had over 35 years in. I think I was 29 and I had 11 years in or something like that. So I was the youngest by far, and the one with the least amount of time there. But by being around them, I started to learn through example what it was like to live a life of selflessness and of purpose. And so I really enjoyed my time there. I would go there 3 times a day and just hang out with the guys. And a couple of my coworkers used to participate in this program, talking with boys from a nearby juvenile hall, St. Gabriel's. And they would bring a group of boys into the prison once a month to hear from this group of guys about what their lives could look like if they continue going down the path that they were on. And so this program intrigued me, and I found myself wanting to participate, but I would keep talking myself out of it. I would say, I'm not a good public speaker. I have this big fear of it. I wouldn't be good, and again, I was in the cell one day, and that urge, was just undeniable. And so I went to the staff person who was in charge of it before I could talk myself out of it, and asked him what he thought about me participating. And he lit up. He said, absolutely, that's a great idea. You're still relatively young. You're Puerto Rican. The boys are going to love you. And he said, look, all you have to do is come and observe. You don't have to say a word. And if you feel comfortable, the following month, you can go ahead and share. So that took all the pressure off.
Yeah.
I said, I could absolutely do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I went, and we're sitting in the visit room. We're sitting in a circle, and the guys, the boys come, and the staff from St. Gabe's are with them, and they take their seats. And I remember thinking, wow, I was just in their shoes, prior to prison. I did everything there is to do in the juvenile punishment system. I was on probation. I was on house arrest. I did time in a detention center. I did community service. I did diversion. I did all of it. So I knew what they were going through. And so the guys stood up one at a time to share. And again, they were much older. And I remember sitting there trying to listen to them through the ears of the boys. And I could tell that they weren't connecting. Right, the guys just weren't speaking their language, and it wasn't intentional, but I can just tell, that the boys weren't really feeling what was being said. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a blown opportunity. Something could be said here that could change the trajectory of these boys' lives, and it's not being said. So the last guy, who I later learned always likes to go last, didn't know that I got these previous instructions to just chill. So he pointed at me and said, you go first. And I could have either made a big deal, I was just there to observe, or I could have just stood up, stepped to the center of the circle, and started talking. I did the latter. And I remember starting off with, 12 years. I was just like you. I was in a detention center. I came home, and I walked them through the steps that led me to prison, and I started describing what the last 12 years were like. And at some point, I wrapped it up, and I looked around at each of the boys. I went around the entire circle, and by this time, I was almost in tears, and I pleaded with them. I said, whatever you do, please don't be me. And I sat down, and being my own worst critic, I thought I sucked, and the next guy went. And then when it was over, all the boys started coming over to me, and they started shaking my hand and giving me hugs and telling me that they felt what I said and that it was so powerful. And the staff from St. Gabriel's started coming over to me, and they were like, please come next month. And they're opening their notebooks, and they're saying, look, I quoted you right here. And I couldn't believe it. I was overwhelmed, Howard. I was trying to play it cool, but on the inside, I was all over the place. And we left, and we were walking back towards the cell blocks in the corridor, and the other guys were saying, I've been doing this X amount of years. I've never seen anyone get a reaction like that. And by the time I got to the cell block, I wanted to talk to everyone about it. I was just pulling guys over and saying, yo, check out what just happened. And I got on the phone. I talked to my mother about it. And then I locked in for the night, and I was in a single cell at the time, and I couldn't sleep. My adrenaline was flowing. I kept playing the night back in my mind over and over. And at some point I realized that I was happy. I was sitting in that 6 by 12 foot cage, surrounded by a 30-foot high concrete wall, experiencing joy for the first time since I was a boy. And I then realized my purpose that night as well. It was to use my gifts, my story, my experience, whatever I have, to prevent as many other people from making the same mistakes I made. It was clear. I continued to participate in that program for like another 6 months. And then, Howard, it got shut down because one rule in prison that there's no exception to is that every good thing comes to an end. And so that was another one of them.
You're
But
right.
at that time, I had enrolled in a college degree program through Villanova. I was co-founding Let's Circle Up. I was in another program called Alternative Surveillance Project. So I just put all my time and energy into all those things and continued to do that until the day I got out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that book is another extension of that. We'll talk about that a little later. I want to hear about your growing up because I don't know much about that. But the other thing is, at some point, I want to hear how you got out of there. I know the story, but it wasn't an easy thing, and it was unusual. So you can pick what you want to go now. But those are two things I want to talk about for sure.
Yeah. So we seen a few pictures a little while ago of me and my mother, and we grew up in a city called Reading, Pennsylvania,
Ready?
Where my grandmother migrated to from Puerto Rico in the early 70s with her 16 children. My mother's one of 16. And so when they came over here, they ranged in ages from ages 3 to 23. My mother was on the older side of that spectrum. And so I was born a few years later. My generation started to pop up in the late 70s and early 80s. And we all lived within like a block radius. So that little alleyway behind that picture right there, and that alleyway, we called the Red Alley. My apartment building is the red bricks on the side there, or was. And everyone lived either on that alleyway or the street in front. And so we did everything in that alley right there. We played from morning to night. It was our little space. Regardless of what was happening around the neighborhood, we were safe there. And our mothers would come out and clean it when it rained and use soap and brooms to tidy it up. It was our little place. And so we did everything together. With a family as large as mine, there's something to celebrate just about every week of the year. So it's either somebody's birthday or some holiday. So we would go to parks and we would, just get together and cook and eat and have fun. That's what I remember of my childhood. It was really good. Again, despite what was happening around us, Reading is one of the top 10 most impoverished cities in the country. It was once a big manufacturing town. All of that left in the the 70s and 80s, and the drug market replaced it. So all of that was going on around me. Lots of violence, but in that little alley, we were safe. I was an excellent student. I loved school. I was projected by my grandmother, my dear abuelita, to be the first president of the United States, she would always say. And in like second grade, I was doing my family's income tax returns. So they would line up, and I'd fill them out, and they'd pay me $20 each, and I'd get them all these thousands in credits, and they would love me for it. And so, had a bright future, it seemed, and my mother was so proud every time I would come home with my straight A's. And, midway through fourth grade, we moved to another part of the city to upgrade, we thought, from an apartment to a row home, and other family members were starting to spread out as well. So we were no longer as close. And right around the corner from our new house was like the busiest heroin corner in the city. And so I walked past that every day to go to the store, to go to church with mom, to go to school. And eventually I went to middle school, and I started losing interest. What I was witnessing on my way to and from school was becoming was capturing more of my attention
Yeah.
than anything that was happening in the classroom. And little by little, I got sucked into it. First, I started like stealing from the corner store, and then smoking cigarettes, and then shoplifting to get the clothes we couldn't afford, and then breaking into cars and stealing cars. And at age 14, I made my first cocaine sale, and I fell in love with it. The money, the power, and it turns out I was pretty good at it. And I climbed up the ladder pretty quickly. Went from that to selling heroin, to weed, to crack cocaine in the 90s, when I was taking over many communities across the country. And, that led me down a quick, dark path to prison.
You've mentioned your mother a number of times. That's been an important relationship for you.
Yeah.
I think. How has that been, and how has that changed over the years you were inside?
She's my world. I mean, she came to visit me, a couple times a month, the whole 27 years. She's who kept me strong, and who prayed for me to come back to my faith. And eventually I did, and I owe it all to her. And she fought for my freedom. We went through years of like trying to get lawyers and saving up money, and that was the only way out for the longest. For the first 2 decades of my incarceration, the door was completely shut on the process I ultimately came home through, commutation, because of something that happened a year prior to my arrest. There was also no talk of legislation being passed to change the sentence. So everyone was basically fighting to be one of the less than 1% of people who get convictions overturned on appeal. It's a isolated fight. It keeps people and their families stuck in this cycle of paying lawyers and getting denied and appealing to the next court. And so we were stuck in that for the longest. And then a movement started to emerge to get the law changed. And I'm a founding member of this group called Right to Redemption. And we went on to form the coalition to abolish death by incarceration. And people's families on the outside were getting involved. And some legislation had gotten introduced for the first time in Pennsylvania history. So there was some movement there. And I wanted my mother to be a part of this. So there was going to be a rally at the state capitol on this issue with this group, the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, also known as CADB. And I remember trying to convince my mother to go to this rally, and she was saying, I'm not. Why am I going to drive all the way there? And what am I going to do? And this, that, and the other. And I was just like, Mom, please, I need you to go. And towards the end of the visit, she said, okay, if this in any way is going to help you come home, I'll go. And she went. And there was a reporter from the local newspaper there. You just showed a framed copy of the article that she came out in, but he talked with her. She shared a few pictures off of her phone, and the next day she was on the front page of the Reading Eagle. And so she had kept this part of her life a secret for the most part for over 2 decades at the time, because of the stigma associated with being the family member of an incarcerated person. And then all of a sudden her secret's out. And so she was well known in the city. She worked in retail down in Center City for many years and knew so many people in the community. So many people loved her. And so she went to church that week, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know that, you know, you were going through this, and you know, we're praying for you and all this." And the response was overwhelming, but it was positive. So she came up to visit me, and we had to debrief and talk about it, and that was it. She never looked back.
Yeah.
She went into full-blown activist mode after that. She started organizing visits with legislators and hosting forums and speaking at events, and you know, ultimately all that work led to my freedom.
Yeah, tell me more about that, because it's pretty rare to get commutation in Pennsylvania. But
Yeah,
is there more to that story?
so we were pushing for this legislation to get passed. I was also in the courts. I litigated for 9 years on an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. That ultimately got denied by the United States Supreme Court. I went all the way up to the top. And around the same time, that same U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to sentence children to mandatory death by incarceration. That ruling came down in 2012. It was made retroactive in 2016. And Pennsylvania had the most people serving that particular sentence, 550. And 300 and something of those alone were from Philadelphia. So most of them were in the prison I was in at Graterford. And so these were the guys I grew up with and who I loved. And, you know, they started to get they started to get resentenced and we're going home. And I wasn't eligible for relief because I committed my crime 5 months after my 18th birthday. So anyway, you know, I'm watching all my friends and dear brothers go home. I'm still there. I ended up filing an appeal arguing that those decisions should apply to me as well because of the brain science that they're based on. So that appeal started working its way up the court. And then a new governor came into office, Tom Wolf, and he commuted someone with a death by incarceration sentence for the first time in, you know, a long time.
Yeah.
And the guy was at Graterford. I knew him. He had over 35 years in. He was like 60 something years old, and he was the non-shooter in a second-degree felony murder case. That quickly became the unwritten standard for who was going to get commutation because the next few fit that same exact bill. None of that applied to me. And so I knew that it would be hard, but I decided to file an application. I started working on it. It took me 8 months. I put it together. I dropped it in the mailbox, and 2 years went by. And in the meantime, Graterford shut down and its replacement, SCI Phoenix, opened up. And so they transferred us from one prison to another. And then about 2 years after that, my process started to begin. And so I started getting interviewed, and I eventually got the prison's recommendation, which was the furthest anyone my age had gotten.
That's unusual.
So all eyes were on me. I ended up getting the Department of Corrections recommendation. I had submitted something like 150 support letters from people in the community. My district attorney was not opposing my release. I had no opposition, actually. I had a bunch of job offers. I had places to live. It was probably one of the best applications they had ever seen. But I eventually had to go in front of the board of pardons and get interviewed by them. It's a 5-member board, and you have to get all 5 of them yes, to get recommended to the governor.
Which is
so
pretty
you can't
rare.
even get there until you overcome that hurdle. And it's extremely political. 2 of the board members are elected officials, the lieutenant governor and the attorney general. Both offices are usually stepping stones to governor or you know, U.S. senator or something else. So that's always looming in the back of the minds of those 2 particular board members. The other 3 are appointed by the governor. But by definition, it's a political process.
Right.
And so anyway, I got interviewed by this board in 2020, and I got 3 out of 5 votes. I missed it by 2, and my application was denied. And I was devastated, and my family was devastated. The following year in 2021, I filed for reconsideration. That too was denied. And I was about to start working on a whole new application. And it would have taken me 4 years to get to where I just was. So I wasn't thrilled about that. And then I had heard about someone who attempted a second reconsideration request. And it didn't go anywhere, but it at least let me know that it was a thing. So I started working on a second reconsideration request, and I ended up putting it in 2022, and they took it up. They voted on it and granted me a new public hearing, and I got interviewed by the same board again. And the next day when they voted, I got all 5. Howard,
That's incredible.
My life,
I didn't know that part.
My life changed that day.
Oh my goodness.
So this huge weight I had been carrying around for a quarter of a century was finally lifted. And about 3 months later, Governor Wolf commuted my sentence. He signed off on June 14th, 2022. And 4 days later, on June 18th of 2022, I walked out of SCI Phoenix a free person for the first time.
I remember those pictures.
That was my first moment outside without handcuffs and chains on. And there we are, thanking God for that miracle.
Wow. Hey, we got about 12 minutes left till we're supposed to go to Q&A. I want to hear about this book. So even though there's lots of things I'd like to hear about.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the book, how it came to be, and then tell us about it.
Yeah, so Charles and I co-founded Let's Circle Up, and so we developed a curriculum for a restorative justice, an intro to restorative justice workshop, which I started writing out at some point. And once I got the job in the chapel, I had access to a computer that didn't have any internet access, but it had Microsoft Word and a printer. So I started putting the manual together on there, the facilitator's manual, and was just working on it for years. I think something like 7 or 8 years.
Every time I'd see you down there, you were
that's what I was doing. And at some point I reached out to you and said, hey, do you know anybody who might be interested in publishing this? And you sent me somewhere, and that didn't work out. And then you connected me with Living Justice Press, and it was the best connection that you could have made because between us, because they were awesome. I started e-messaging with Denise, and they actually sent someone from their staff to come to the prison and meet with me and the rest of the guys, and they spent a whole weekend in Philadelphia and 3 days inside the prison. And so we sat down and we talked about like what the vision is, and started to sketch out a plan. And at the time, Howard, I was condemned to grow old and die there. And Living Justice Press decided to work with me despite that reality, through all the obstacles that comes with trying to work with someone across a prison wall. So it was all like phone calls and letters and emails, and we started working on it, and then out of nowhere my life changed, and I got this vote from the Board of Pardons to proceed to the governor. And so I started working really hard on it, finishing up some of the edits. And Howard, I don't know if I told you this story yet, but a month before the governor signed, security came and confiscated the computers from the chapel. So I show up to work one morning, and the desk my computer was on is empty. And so I run to my supervisor, the head chaplain, and I say, "What happened to the computers?" And he says, "Well, security came and got them this morning." And I was like, my manual's on there, and so I need it. And so he reached out to security, and they emailed that file to him, and we forwarded it to Denise and them on the outside, and that's where it stayed until I got out. I actually could have finished all the editing during that final month. So I came home and, I didn't have time to return to it, right? So much was moving quickly, and a year went by, and Denise had sent me an email and said, look, the board wants to know what's going on with this project. Are we going to move forward? Are we going to shelf it? Like, she said, I totally understand why you can't, work on it right now, but these are the questions that are coming up. And so that gave me the kick in the behind I needed. I had a voucher to stay at this Quaker retreat center. I had spoken at a conference there, and part of the compensation was this 3-night voucher. So I cashed it in, and I went up there in the woods and locked myself in and finished up the editing and, got it to her. Our goal was to have it published before the National Association for Community and Restorative Justice conference last year. And we made the deadline, and it came out a month before that. And so we got to introduce it there and do some book signing.
Tell us a bit about what the book's about, how people could use it. We had a few minutes yet. So what is the book, and who can use it? How do you use it?
This Intro to RJ workshop is completely experiential, participatory, and fun. It's not lecture based. There are no PowerPoints in it. It's just people sitting in a circle, sharing wisdom and learning from each other through a series of coordinated exercises. And so the manual lets you know how to facilitate those activities, detailed instructions, purpose, process, and questions. So it's all laid out in there. So anyone who has it can facilitate our Intro to Restorative Justice workshop, which has touched thousands of people's lives already, inside and outside prison. It's actually the curriculum I use in my college courses that I teach. Okay. So it's applicable to prison, to community, to institutions like colleges and otherwise. It's purposely created to work with any group of people, any education level, any background.
Well, part of the beauty of it, it comes from the inside. Like some of us from outside can try to write that kind of thing, but we don't know the kind of environment, So well,
that's why it's called From the Community Up. Yeah. And I got that from a quote of yours. You like to say that justice needs to come from the community, from the community up. Yeah. So I adapted that to say, from the inside up. This came from prison, and it's, working its way to the top, not from the top down. So
are there some of the same exercises that I would have in my classes, my groups would have experienced when we came inside, right? Some of those were really powerful experiences.
Yeah. So, I've had my life has been beautiful since coming home, and I've had the opportunity to speak at a bunch of different events and, just share my story and talk about, who's really in prison. We have this idea of who's in prison, until you meet someone, and why we need to move away from that inhumane, cruel practice. So it's been really good. I've been blessed, and I also have a responsibility for all those I left behind. My teachers, my mentors, the guys who set me on a path that ultimately led to my freedom are still in there. So aside from my restorative justice work, I have an obligation to also, bring my people home and work towards a world where prisons no longer exist.
Well, my friends inside tell me they're looking forward to the day that when you're allowed to come back in. I just talked to one of them this weekend. Yeah, he mentioned that, and it's really good. And the last time I zoomed with you, you're sitting there feeding a little daughter. That's so amazing too.
Yeah. So I have an amazing fiance. Her name is Roxanne, and we have a 6-year-old daughter named Jubilee. who is just the joy of our lives right now. You know, she's currently upstairs with her grandmother. You know, she was taking a nap. She might be awake now, but you know, I didn't know if, you know, this would ever happen for me. You
Okay.
know, I still remember turning 40 on the inside, and, you know, thinking to myself, that shit passed. You know, that is just another thing that the state deprived me of. And then, you know, seven years later,
There you
here I
go.
am, proud father of a beautiful baby girl.
Well, anything else you want to add before we turn it over to the Q&A?
No, I'd love to hear from viewers.
All right, let's do that. Let's turn it back to the hosts here, and they can see what kind of questions are coming up here.
Thanks, Felix. Thanks, Howard. Really appreciated your conversation. And we have some questions from the chat that have been coming in already, so we'll look at some of those, but please continue to add questions as we go. So let's see. Question from Darren Johnson. What are the primary challenges you've observed in implementing restorative justice practices in correctional settings, and how can practitioners overcome them?
Yeah. Well, you know, restorative justice is contrary to everything that prisons stand for, you know, so it's obviously going to be a challenge. You know, fortunately, I was in a prison that had a long history of administrations that were relatively favorable towards programming created and led by incarcerated people. That's not true in most states, and it wasn't even true for most of the other prisons in Pennsylvania. So I was just in a unique situation where the prison was in close proximity to a large city, Philadelphia, and you know, allowed an unusual access to the outside world. It's how I met Howard. It's how I met our mutual friend Barb and so many others. And it's the context that allowed for something like Let's Circle Up to sprout. What it takes is persistence and perseverance and relationships. We had to work with people in the administration to get just about everything done. You know, so those relationships were really key, and we earned the respect of some, you know, some key people who worked at the prison, and, you know, they would leave and new people would come, and we would have to build new relationships with them. But I would say that that's what it boils down to. I mean, that's what restorative justice boils down to: relationships.
Thank you. We have a couple questions from Aaron Brummer. One is, what does the bottom of your sweatshirt say? I think she has seen it by now, but there it is. Yeah, for everybody else. Thank you. And secondly, she writes, I'm a graduate student studying RJ and doing work currently in prisons. What advice do you have for outsiders like me, a white female without lived experience of incarceration, developing workshops on trauma healing, victim impact RJ, collaboratively with incarcerated people within a prison?
Well, you know, for a lot of different reasons, the main geographic of people who come to volunteer in prisons are white women, you know, who don't have lived experience, and there's, you know, a lot of theories for why that is, but without getting into all that, you know, I've worked with people who didn't have the lived experience since the beginning of Let's Circle Up, you know, and it takes everyone to start, you know, a movement inside a place like prison. And, you know, if in some situations, the outside team might have to be the ones who are in communication with the administration. there might not be a direct line like we had at Greaterford. So your role is going to be instrumental, you know. So I would, just encourage you to build relationships with the people on the inside, get to know them as well as you can, and they should get to know you also as well as they can, and also build whatever relationships you need to build with the administration to get the programs going, because you need them for everything, even like getting participants on a call out so they could receive passes to come to the room. We can't do that on the inside, and outside volunteers can't either. The gate memos for outside people to come into the prison, all that has to be handled. So I would just, don't focus on what you're lacking, but focus on what skills and gifts you bring to the project.
Thank you, Felix. From Philip, asks, can you speak a little bit about the restorative practices you utilize in the Healing Futures program you manage?
Yes. So I was blessed to jump right into a job as soon as I came home with Healing Futures, Philadelphia's first pre-charge youth restorative justice diversion program. I currently manage it alongside Queen Cheyenne Wade, and we have a team of awesome facilitators. We get our referrals from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office of young people who've been arrested and are eligible for diversion. We meet with them and their caregivers, and then we enroll them and guide them through our process. And at the end of it, their charges get dismissed, and it's as if they were never arrested, so they can go on with their lives, hopefully successfully and happily, without the stain of a criminal record or the trauma of having spent any time in a cage. It's a restorative justice program. So we meet with them, and we meet with the people harmed in whatever the situation was, and prepare both for all in an ultimate encounter in what we call a restorative community conference. So once everyone is ready, we sit in circle, and both can bring supporters, and we also invite community members who we select to sit in circle with us as well. And we talk about what happened. The person harmed gets an opportunity to share what the whole experience was like for them. Their supporters can share. The responsible youth's loved one, usually a mother or a grandparent, talks about what it was like for them. And then we turn it over to the responsible youth, and they read an apology letter and say whatever else they feel moved to say. And then we open up the floor and they exchange questions and answers. The community members could chime in at that point. The facilitators will say a few words. And once we believe we're at a good place, we turn our attention to developing the restorative plan. So this is a concrete action that the young person then has to do to, as we like to say, put things more right, or to do sorry. And so we close the circle. The young person goes on to complete their plan. And then we close the case and throw them a community celebration, where we celebrate the fact that a young person was accountable and that the community was brave enough to come together and try something different.
Thank you, Felix. Here's a question from Heidi. How can I get involved in the coalition to abolish death by incarceration? I am in Long Beach, California.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's actually organizations out there. One in particular called the Other Death Penalty that I think is still around, doing a lot of work. Our work over here is mostly focused on ending the practice of death by incarceration in Pennsylvania, but we would love to connect with people elsewhere, hear what other folks are doing, exchange strategy. So anyway, we meet once a month, hybrid. Some people meet in person, and then we have a virtual option as well. I can try my best to get you information on how to join our next meeting. Joe, maybe you can figure out a way to facilitate that between us. I can also drop my information, or you can, Joe, drop my information in the chat. Put my email on there, my phone, and anyone can feel free to reach out to me, and we can talk about how to connect.
Thanks for that, Felix. Well, sorry, I'm getting some reverb there, but yeah, we'll put your information into the chat. Our next question from Stephanie. What advice do you have for correctional system that is working from the inside up to explore how restorative justice and practices can be used non-traditionally from within the walls?
Yeah. Well, I would take the lead of those incarcerated. I would, find out who in the prison is passionate about restorative justice or wants to learn more, and ask them what the needs are and what an effective program could look like, because no one knows what the needs are better than the people on the inside in that context. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are good-willed come in from the outside, bringing programming to the incarcerated people, hoping to educate them, to save them, whatever the thinking is, and usually falls flat. So I would encourage you to make it to really make it come from the inside up, and build with those who are most directly affected by the issues that we're trying to change.
Thank you. A question from Darren. How do you personally differentiate as a returning citizen retributive justice versus restorative justice?
Yeah. Well, one causes more harm and one seeks to heal. That's what I would boil it down to. One perpetuates and continues an endless cycle of violence, and restorative justice tries to intervene in that by empowering the people who are directly impacted by the harm to figure out what's needed and what needs to happen. The criminal punishment system removes that power from all the people involved, and puts it in the hands of so-called professionals. So that would be my clearest distinction. One harms, one heals.
Thank you. Maybe a follow-up question before we get to the next one. I think about that difference, restorative versus retributive, but I'm also aware that most of us have been raised within a retributive culture, right, in systems and institutions. And so we have that retributive approach, impulse, mindset baked in to ourselves, our institutions. How have you worked on that for yourself? And replacing the retributive with the restorative. It's
a challenge. Like Mariam Kaba likes to say, prisons and police live in our minds and in our bodies. It's how we move. It's how we interact with each other. We have a retributive and punishment outlook towards the world, and it takes a lot of effort to undo that, to unlearn that. Most people walking around out here see justice as synonymous with cops, courtrooms, and cages, and it's all we know. Even in our Let's Circle Up workshops, it usually takes a couple sessions uh, before people can start seeing justice outside of that context. And so we do activities that, that help us see justice as something else, starting slowly and then building up. We do something called a justice word storm, where we put the word justice up on a sheet of flip chart or on the board and ask people to throw out the first word that comes to mind when they think of justice, and all kind of things come up. And most of the words are in somehow connected to the criminal punishment system. And a facilitator will ask at the end, we were, asked to respond to the word justice. Why are all these words about prison and cops and courtrooms? And then we start to, wonder why that is. And then we do an activity called Reimaging Justice, where we look at Lady Justice and explore all the meanings of that image. And then we get into small groups and draw our own image of what we think justice should look like, and then talk about that. So anyway, we, in all these experiential and creative ways, try to work out of, seeing justice in this really small context, which actually hasn't been around that long. If we think about human history, right? Before colonization and slavery and genocide, people were doing justice, but in a completely different way, right? It was about, community, and harm to one is harm to all, and what we need to do to bring someone back. The current system is all about exclusion. So, I had to go through that process myself, reading Howard's books and reading other people's, works, and, just like really coming to a place of, seeing that the way things are currently done in our society is completely wrong, and that we have to do something different. So, the workshops are basically an attempt to get people to come to that conclusion on their own.
Thank you, Felix. A question from Michael. Good afternoon, brother. This is a beautiful exchange. I'm forever grateful to your contributions within the most deplorable conditions we endured while detached from freedom and now in society. Thank you for having a heavy hand in propelling me in the direction I am in now. It changed the trajectory of my life. My question is, how can you make value of community deeply ingrained or widespread?
So Michael's a Let's Circle Up alum. He took all of our workshops at Gradeford and became a facilitator and moved into leadership and just came home recently. I'm thrilled that you're home. Welcome home, my brother. And I'm happy to see all the amazing things that you're doing with your life now, which, you should have been doing all along. And after saying all that, I forgot the question, but I wanted to, lift that up and lift you up.
Yeah, the question, how can you make value of community deeply ingrained or widespread?
I'm always thinking of ways to build community, to connect people, to find spaces where, people can get to know each other and, realize how much they have in common. I do it on my own block. My neighbors, unknowingly support, city officials who are in favor of more prisons and cops, because they think it's the only way to safety. So I have to have conversations with them about abolition. I usually wear shirts with some kind of message, as you can see today, and so sometimes I'm walking around and somebody will be like, hey, like, what do you mean abolish police? Like, what are we going to do then? And then I have to have, this whole conversation about, the history of policing and why they're not on our side. And, it's just about conversation, finding someone who you connect with and, finding ways to deepen the conversation into something that could hopefully, lead to a larger paradigm shift in our society.
Thank you, Felix. Any more questions? Let's see.
Do you want to watch the rest of the pictures? And then talk about being a father.
Yeah, well, Felix, any more that you want to share about your current life and being a father? And we saw a few of your pictures, your beautiful pictures, and any more you want to share about that journey?
Yeah, she just woke up. I heard her. It's been unreal. It's a love I can't really describe. A love I was deprived from experiencing for 27 years. And so now she's in my heart, she's in my mind. Every decision I make has her and my family at the forefront. There I go reading the message with her. I'm so amazed at like the new thing that she does every day, and it's really transforming me. In many ways, I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her. So I'm, just trying to like use my experience to shape her in a way that unfortunately I wasn't shaped until way later in life. I didn't have a father. My father left right after I was born. I was raised by my mother, and then eventually a stepfather who was emotionally absent for the most part. So now I have the opportunity to be that father that I never had. To my daughter, and it's changed me in so many different ways. Hard to describe again, but it's such a joy. And when I come home from work, or when I see the latest depressing news, I look at her, and her eyes are so clear and white, and haven't been stained yet by this world. And she gives me so much hope and inspiration. And I just look forward to watching her grow up into the daughter of God that she is, and to see what she was put on earth to do, which I have a feeling is going to be something great.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing those beautiful baby pics. I love baby pics. We have a question from Ruth. Thank you for your powerful testimony. My question is, what strategies do you believe would be most effective in supporting political prisoners and addressing mass arbitrary detentions?
Public awareness, getting the community out here involved in, the cases of individuals, but also more largely on the issue. I would say that given the political nature of incarceration, by definition, every incarcerated person is a politicized or a political, incarcerated person, who all need our help out here. Because the prison is designed to silence people, to hide people, and sometimes, depending on the situation, we out here are their only voice and their only opportunity to communicate with the world, and we must use it. As I said earlier, I carry that responsibility, and what I would even call a burden every day of my life out here. I feel I believe that as someone who miraculously escaped that situation, I am bound to bring as many people out of there as I can. So I would just encourage you to continue working with the people who you're working with, to share space with them, whatever that looks like, and to take their lead, and be an extension of them out here as they're not able to.
Thank you. We have a related question from Heidi. How do you balance working towards abolition while still making change within our current systems?
I mean, that's the challenge. The diversion program I manage works with the district attorney's office. A key part of the punishment machinery. And we get our referrals from them, and fortunately we work with an awesome team in that office. They don't necessarily reflect the values of others who are in there, but the way I see it is they have our people, and they're on an assembly line into the mouth of the beast, and we get to pluck a few people off of that assembly line through our diversion program. So we need to continue doing that work, and while we're doing that work, we also need to be working to dismantle these systems that are well funded and well staffed, and aren't experiencing any of the problems that we are in the nonprofit world and in these other sectors that are trying to make change. And so we need to continue chipping away with that, continue chipping away at it in whatever way that looks like, whether it's rallying, raising awareness, collective education is going to be crucial in this fight, because as I said earlier, most people continue to support policies that oppress them and their family without knowing it. So we have to continue to let people know that there are different ways to handle harm, and not only is this not the only way, but it continues to cause harm. So mass education, public education needs to happen first, which is why Let's Circle Up chose to focus on restorative justice education and not necessarily practice, because we can't get to the kind of world that we want to see in terms of RJ being more widespread until people know about it. That's where it has to start.
Thank you so much, Felix. Any final thoughts? Anything else you'd like to share before we move to announcements?
Well, I just want to say I love you, Howard, my brother. You're my
same here.
It's such a joy and honor to share this virtual space with you, and look forward to coming down to visit you soon. And I'm just so grateful that our paths crossed, and that I got to learn so much from you, and that I'm now in a position to pass that forward to others. I'm just eternally grateful.
And you are doing that in a very impressive way, an inspiring way. So thank you so much for that, and for your friendship.
Likewise. I appreciate the Zaire Institute and all the work that you're doing, Joe and Corey, and every bit of it counts, right? We all need to be working together to spread the word, to educate, to build community, and to work towards this world we're trying to make.
Well, thank you both for being here, and Felix, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your wisdom. And I know it's been a great gift for all of us who've been listening today. So we're just going to have a few quick announcements before we wrap up for today. First of all, I want to invite you to our next webinar, February webinar on the 19th. And Kay Pranis and Samuel Johan will be talking about using circles to support individual and community mental health in response to climate disaster. So please register, sign up for that, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. Also, visit our website at the Zare Institute for updates and information and resources. And if you'd like to support our work, you can donate at zare-institute.org/donate/. And I think that's it. Corey, am I missing anything?
No, I think we're good to go.
All right. Thanks again, Felix, Howard, and thank you, Corey. It's wonderful to work with you all, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care of yourselves.
It's been an honor. We will.
It's an honor too. Yes. Indeed.